everyone. Welcome to another episode of Just Jared. I believe it's episode 10 in our first season. Great to be with you all this fine day. I am coming to you from my glorious kitchen counter out here in Western Mass because of I feel like it's 2 feet of snow, but it's probably really 18 inches of snow that we got, and I've been digging out of for the last couple of days. And one thing I've realized in that process is that I'm not as young as I used to be, and my back doesn't love the snow. So it's all good. But good to be here today with my colleagues to talk about some of the work we're doing in the research space, in particular related to experiential learning and other workforce initiatives. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves briefly to all of you, and then I will take the floor back with a kickoff question and dive right in. And because I'm feeling adventurous today, I'm just gonna go in alphabetical order by last name. So Richard, you're up first.
Thanks, Jared. It's great to join you here. I'm a professor of sociology and education at University of California, Irvine, and I've been an external research partner to Northeastern for a little over 2 years now. I'm sure we'll have a chance to talk about that in the podcast, but been partners with Connie, Yowell, and Sasha Goldman and the rest of the team working to do applied research on Northeastern's co-op program.
Sure. Mike?
Sure. Hi, thanks. Mike Dean. I'm an associate teaching professor in the Graduate School of Education. Been Northeastern for about 10 years now. My life has been in educational research and education in general. Started out as high school math teacher and worked at the International Baccalaureate and International Rescue Committee doing research there before coming to Northeastern. And am lucky to be working with Connie and Sasha now on a project, planning grant to look at what is called International Big Picture Learning Credential, which I'm sure we'll talk a little bit more about. Thanks.
Great. And then we will go to Sasha. If you guys are testing my alphabetical order, I can see it in your eyes.
You're doing a great job.
I tried.
Sasha Goldman. I am the director for the Center of Future Higher Education and Work here at Northeastern. So I work with both Richard Aram and Mike Dean and Connie on a variety of different research projects that we're sort of stewarding through at CPS. And I think we'll focus on those two projects today, but happy to talk about others too.
And Connie.
Hi, everybody. I'm Connie Yowell. I'm the executive director of the center with Sasha and have the pleasure of working with everybody on this call. Been at Northeastern for about 5 years and have a background in education, research, philanthropy, and innovation.
Thanks, Connie. Thanks for including me and working with the people on the call, unlike Sasha, who neglected to mention me. How sad. Hold that against her another day.
It was a given.
Yeah, sure. Absolutely. So what I'd like to do is, and just for our audience so that they recognize that I'm not totally off my rocker, welcome back to the podcast, Connie and Sasha. If you could start perhaps by one of you or both of you, just at a high level, reminding the audience what the Center for the Future of Higher Education and Work is and does. And then from there, I'd like to dive into each of the examples that Mike and Richard mentioned.
Sure, happy to take a stab at it. So at the center, we're really interested in studying how learning and work are changing, thinking about assessments and scalable models to improve pathways for learners and employers. We're doing research in a variety of different areas, but thinking both about learner outcomes and operations, how we can use the research we're doing and apply it directly to our students at the College of Professional Studies, Northeastern more broadly, and then beyond Northeastern. But I think our main focuses are things like work integrated learning, non-credit pathways like badges, micro-credentials, and quality assurance in that area is a newer aspect of our research. thinking about the data infrastructure for these things. So how skills are being articulated and how data is being transferred around student learning from the universities and education providers, training providers, and into employment. We're also interested and do some side projects in AI learning support in the classroom and outside of the classroom, as well as assessment of all of this. So alternative assessments, how that connects into credentialing and non-credit and for-credit pathways. Those are kind of the four main things. Connie, what did I miss?
That sounds good.
Okay.
As indeed, and I think all important work for the future of higher education. So well aligned. So great. So then with that, I would like to dive into each example, and I'll make a basketball analogy, since it's almost February going into March Madness. I'll throw up a jump ball and let you, Richard, and Mike figure out who wants to jump in first, and tip that ball in whichever direction you like. So who's game to kick us off with some of the work you've been working on, some of the results you might have found, interesting avenues to pursue, how awful it is to work with Connie, Sasha, and I, whatever might make you happy.
Richard, go right ahead.
Yeah, I'm happy to jump in. I think I've got an inch of height on the rest of the group. So I think I get the ball. The Yeah, so I wanted to jump in kind of by underscoring something Sasha said about building research capacity. So one of the things that I uh, worked with the Northeastern partners to put in place was a mechanism to institutionalize data collection so that the campus would have the uh, capacity to do ongoing continuous improvement. And so one of the things I'm kind of most proud about is that we, in the last 2 years, 2+ years, we put in place a mechanism where the Northeastern students would be surveyed at 3 points in time, one during their course preparing them for the co-op, the second as they started the co-op, and then a final survey as they and after they had finished and completed the co-op. And so we consulted the research literature and kind of put together instruments on kind of core things you would care about, things like mentoring and supervision and skills utilized in these settings, the nature of the co-op, and so on. And so we created that infrastructure. And the other kind of key piece of infrastructure we put in place was all these campuses now are utilizing third-party vendors to identify postgraduate outcomes of university students. Prior to this, we've struggled with being able to identify what actually happens to our graduates, and so now there are these companies that scrape the internet, taking advantage of programs like LinkedIn and the like, to identify the occupations that individuals are in, the job titles after graduating. And so we've taken that information and been able to code it in a very detailed way to identify the quality of the job, the firm that someone's attached to, the industry that one's a part of, whether it's a Fortune 500 company, and so on. And so we've created this infrastructure that allows us to really understand the nature of the co-op, as well as the relationship of the co-op experience to the student's college to career trajectory.
Yeah, and I wonder, as you were talking, thinking, I wonder, and on your last point, So one of the things that's interesting about co-op to me is that back in my old days as a faculty when I used to teach, students would come back and could tell me about things that I didn't know about, right? Because I'm in the ivory tower in the classroom and or doing cutting edge research, but not necessarily in the application of whatever they might be doing for work. So in thinking about that, I wonder if you have a sense from at least our student body how they feel the co-op aligns with their actual degree preparation, or do they are they're supposed to be connected, but are they fundamentally perceived as being disconnected by the students?
We found the opposite in the survey results, that the students overwhelmingly attest to the alignment of the internship with their programs, and also very high rates of satisfaction with the co-ops as well. So from that standpoint, a lot of kind of positive feedback we were getting from the students.
Richard, Jared, if it's okay, I just want to
Yeah,
ask Richard
please.
to say just a little bit about before you started the work here and joined us in this study, Richard. You've instrumented all of UC Irvine, which is where you are Dean of the School of Ed and are faculty now. And in doing that, I think part of what really started to interest you was your findings around sort of career preparation and internships and the Irvine campus. It sort of, whether it was that or if it was academic courses that had an impact on employment or underemployment. And could you just say a little bit about
Sure.
that? Because we're getting to unpack that black box a whole lot more in this work.
Yeah, great. So let me say kind of two things. First, let me describe the project at UCI. Let's call it like a foundational project that we drew on to create these instruments and research capacity at Northeastern. So starting in fall 2019, which was our first cohort in this project, the Mellon Foundation had provided initial funding for us to create a measurement system for UCI undergraduate students that would integrate basically all the data we had available on campus to understand students' experiences, trajectories, and outcomes. So by that, the administrative data that we've been able to draw on and integrate is not just the admissions data and the course taking patterns, but also information on what class, what students are in classes with you. Who are you rooming with? Are you engaging in career services? Are you in what particular ways are you engaged in career service? What about other academic support programs on campus? What about clubs? You join in clubs. And so we have all of this very rich administrative data that and integrated together with all the learning management systems clickstream data about the students' actual behavioral activity in their courses, which are all mediated now by these learning management systems like Canvas. And in addition, we surveyed students over their first year on a weekly basis. And then after that, at the end of every academic term, and then after they graduated. And so we had this incredibly robust data system built at UCI that, again, we drew on that expertise, started in fall 2019. We're in our 7th cohort now. And we took advantage of that measurement system to kind of give us kind of a head start to draw on in terms of designing the surveys and implementing them at Northeastern. Now, to Connie's other question about kind of core findings and so on, I would go back even before that UCI project in fall 2019 to some of my earlier work on college learning and undergraduate experiences. And unfortunately, what we find is large numbers of students they're not very engaged in their academic coursework. They're often going through the motions. The academic demands aren't particularly rigorous. They're not, and the growth and development is modest. Not for all. You have these exceptionally devoted students that are, the coursework, of course, can be transformative. But for too many students, it's modest at best. And for them, these experiences outside of the classroom, experiences with workplace learning, experiences with internships, with research apprenticeships with faculty, uh, uh, experiences with clubs and taking on leadership role in clubs. These things can really kind of have a transformative role in helping develop their trajectories. And that's kind of what we drew on. And that's why when Connie contacted me, hey, can you come help study the co-ops at Northeastern? I was like, I am all about the fact that you guys are doing it at scale. It's an incredible opportunity to study and learn about these uh, high impact programming. And so I was drawn to it, as Connie alluded to, because of my prior research that for too many students, the classroom is really not where the action is.
I can admit here, or I will admit here that I probably was one of those students in college. Like I can literally remember thinking to myself after I graduated, like, interesting. I mean, I did a senior thesis, so that was nice. I mean, I didn't go to a place that had a co-op, but it was essentially that.
I was
But
going to say
go ahead.
something actually contrarian, Jared, to that. Often, like as academics, we're the ones that were turned on in the classroom, and so we're like the exceptions that, like, what do you mean they're not turned on and learning? But again, the if you just do any investigation observation of students for significant numbers, there's very little engagement and development that's coming out of the formal classroom setting.
And just to be fair to my own self and the time in which I went to college, right? Back then, still some now, but more so back then. Like it was about going to class and listening to somebody speak at PowerPoint. If PowerPoint was the new shiny thing, like we don't have to use those slide things anymore that flip around and overheads. Like PowerPoint's so great. That didn't really do much for me. But the irony, though, on the flip side, is I can remember applying to Northeastern in the '90s when I was looking at colleges and thinking to myself, oh, by the way, just so the audience knows, I'm a high anxiety person. The thought of having to go on co-op stressed me out so much. I was like, I can't even do that. Like, it's a whole new experience that's going to blow my brain. And as an 18 or 20-year-old, so who knows how I landed here, but I did, doing whatever things I do. I mean, that's why it's also fun when I talk to my PhD mentor. She's like, "Holy crap, you do what?" She's like, "We used to fly to Washington D.C. and you were hyperventilating in a bag." I'm like, "Yeah, I know. It's all good." So great. And then maybe Mike, I'll give you a chance to talk about some of the work you're doing, and then we'll go round and round as the merry-go-round goes.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, and there's some definite connections in the work that we're doing. Almost backward map to K-12, but there are definitely connections to the different terms people use: real world learning, internships, etc. And specifically with the project we're looking at is the measurement of those. And so, as often happens in the K-12 world, we go through cycles of different types of learning and curriculum and whatnot. And there's been a push, I would say, over the last 20 years towards competency-based, skills-based curricula. And it's not new, it's been there before, but there has been a push towards that. And there's a lot of really interesting, innovative work going on in high schools all over the world, right? And the measurement aspect of it and the assessment aspect is really challenging because it forces us to go outside of a lot of the psychometric work that we've done on testing, on the traditional testing, which is great and useful, but there's limitations just like anything else, right? And so really trying to assess students on the work they're doing, not just in a typical classroom, is very interesting and important, because it's probably not something we do very well, because it is challenging, especially from the perspective of external assessments and the users of the end result of that assessment. And so I think as educators, we feel we can observe our students doing things and get a good gauge on how well they're doing. But when we think about college admissions or applying for jobs, external to the student and what's happening there, we need some type of assessment that is trustworthy, and that is someone like an institution like Northeastern will put trust in. And so we're working with big picture learning, which is, they don't call themselves a competency-based framework. It's more of a skills-based and learning outcomes framework. But the University of Melbourne and Melbourne Metrics developed what's called the IBPLC. It trips me up all the time having worked for IB, but it's the International Big Picture Learning Credential. And they're attempting to measure these outcomes externally. And they've done a lot of work in Australia, and it's more common there. But we're looking at the context of the United States, which is very different, especially from a college admissions, but also job going, because it's not just a college prep program. It is supposed to prepare students for the workforce as well. And you see this, which is nice, right? We have an amazing educational system, huge and trying to do so many things, but not all students are met where they need to be met, right? As we're saying, and not all students react the same way to different forms of learning. And so something like big picture learning, and you hear lots of terms, whether durable skills or 21st century skills, are focusing on those. And oftentimes in internships and outside the classroom. And so we want to study the IBPLC in the US context to see how well it can predict student performance beyond secondary school, and in particular in the university level.
Yeah, that's awesome. And durable skills, 21st century skills is typically thought of as things like communication, problem solving, critical thinking. Fundamentally, as an educator, I believe those should be the new gen eds that build the foundation of everyone's learning journey. But we'll see how that goes. And by the way, Mike, if you ever need somebody to go back to Melbourne, I'm happy to. I studied abroad there myself and love that city and country. So I'm always happy to go back. But I also do. It's a fantastic place. I think the assessment work too is something really important that even myself, I've always had it in the back of my mind and have tried to move it to the forefront of my mind. I mean, the one thing I can tell you is that I in my own experience, clearly, took all the tests to get into college, and thankfully Northeastern and many other places are test optional these days because I just don't do well on standardized tests. And I fundamentally, sad news for any students who might be listening, I don't teach anymore, but I don't believe in tests in the classroom either. Like, I think it's a really bad assessment tool. I think there's other tools that we can use for assessment, because what did I used to do? Kind of to your point, Richard, earlier on the classroom, I would cram it into my head. I would walk into the classroom, vomit it onto the paper, walked out of the classroom, and if you came and found me 5 minutes after I left the classroom and asked me if I could probably remember 5% of what I was supposedly have learned in that process. So, not the best, but I'd like to think that I did okay regardless. And then I. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think it's right. Our assessments have gotten pretty good at measuring content knowledge, but that's one small piece, as you're saying. There's the much larger piece, and so we need to be able to capture those as well, and allow students to perform and show that performance in all of these different areas. And content knowledge is just one; it's an important one, but there's several others. And you're right. This framework is trying to get at that, and many other frameworks are trying to get at that. it's much newer. We don't have this very long history of developing assessments like we have, for instance, in biology or mathematics, right? And so we really need to put resources into that to continuously improve it. And we certainly don't have the answers now, but studies like this and the work that Melbourne Metrics is doing on this type of assessment pushes us forward. And it's fun and it's interesting, really, to be involved in that type of work.
And if I'm a little provocative, which I tend to be, I might argue that yes, content knowledge is important, but it's not necessarily as important as it used to be, because back in the old days, I had to go to the library or someplace else to get that content knowledge. And fundamentally, I walk around with a supercomputer with me all the time in my cell phone, and I can just Google it or ask ChatGPT for some of it. Now, fundamentally, you can't do that. You can't go ask ChatGPT or Google everything. So you need to have some content knowledge, but I would argue that it's less necessary than it has been in the past. Even to the point where I argue with my colleagues all the time, like, I'm like, why would a student back in the old days, students had to go to university to get knowledge? They can get knowledge anywhere now. We need to teach them what to do with the knowledge more than we ever have before. But that's just me.
So
Yeah,
Jared, one of the things that makes me think about is sort of the work you've been doing in CPS and how we're organizing the purpose of the center, which is to say, future of higher ed and the future of work is and will be changing tremendously over the next several years as a part of AI, as a part of political landscape, as a part of the financial crisis, for a whole set of reasons. And so, and you have in many ways started to articulate a vision of where that future of higher ed might go around stackable credentials, pathways, the way you've articulated that. And you've also sort of positioned CPS as a sandbox for innovation, because we actually don't know or have the infrastructure to get to that vision and or to constantly iterate on it. And one of the things I've learned from my time doing innovation in higher ed is that we tend to just pinball back and forth between bright, shiny objects over and over again. And so part of what I really appreciate about CPS and what you're enabling us to do at the center is to be able to pair innovation with an R&D infrastructure. And that there's higher ed hasn't yet, I would say, figured out how to do research on itself and to really learn from that research and benefit from it. And so Mike and Richard are two amazing researchers who are building capacity around how we can be an ongoing R&D engine, in addition that works alongside the innovation. Because as we think about, if you're right, Jared, and at the end of the day, we want to have the research, the rigorous research and evidence to say that you're right. But experiential learning becomes more important. Durable skills become more important. Richard, the study we're doing with Richard at UC is one of the largest studies on experiential learning, I think, that's been conducted in a really rigorous way. And we know, or I know from trying to implement experiential learning at scale, it breaks if you can't assess it, if you can't really figure out what's happening there. And so the combination of what Mike's doing with what Richard's doing begins to be a really nice R&D infrastructure along with our innovation around experiential learning.
Yeah, that's fantastic, because I was going to ask that question, but you answered it. So go ahead, Mike.
Well, I was going to just jump in on that. I mean, another way I think to reiterate what Connie says is to think about educational research, educational schools, School of Professional Studies is kind of a particular version of that. They've often been marginalized in higher ed institutions because they're doing stuff that's not like STEM research or scholarship, that kind of more traditional academic scholarship. I think we're entering a period where this kind of research is going to become so central to the institution that it's going to move it from the periphery to the center of the institution. So campuses that are going to hope to be able to adjust to the transformations that are coming ahead are going to be kind of owning this as kind of a central, important activity that isn't just done on the side. It's not just done by a few staff people in the institutional research office. You take advantage of the expertise of faculty to understand the transformations that are occurring to be able to help the institution navigate them. And so I truly believe that. And I think places like Northeastern and UCI are kind of at the forefront of that potential movement.
Yeah, I
Great to
agree
hear.
with
And I
both.
fundamentally believe that, actually, and I didn't pay audience. I didn't pay Connie or Richard to say either of those things. Go ahead,
And
Mike.
building capacity is going to be, and kind of that it's a normal function, right? As both were saying, that it hasn't always been, it's been, you know, on the side, is really important because it's messy and it's going to change, and it's going to change rapidly. And just having that infrastructure and capacity to stay along with that change and be learning and staying ahead of it is really important. And you do see a lot of good work being done in CPS, and I'll plug the GSE. You know, the doctorate there is an action research doctorate that's educators working in their environment and for change in their contexts, and so they are doing it. As they are working, right alongside, whether it be in a high school or higher ed environment, they are there building their capacity, but also their institution's capacity to conduct research on themselves and learn from themselves. And I think that's really important, that the point that Rich is making about building that capacity within us, and Connie, that it becomes normal, that this is what we do and that we continue to build upon it and stay ahead of it.
Great points. I mean, to all of your points and to something Connie said, right? I think institutions of higher education are all about driving innovation, except when it comes to our own selves, and that's like pulling teeth or fingernails or whatever the analogy you want to think about. But it's fun too in the context of college professional studies and other schools like ours. There's others, you know, like UCI and even others that I interact with in our spaces, right? Like we are on the periphery, historically have been on the periphery, which allows us to do this type of work and drive it into the center, because we get less resistance, if you will, at the onset, because change is hard and nobody wants to change their own system, except for us here, perhaps. But because I will die trying, and I'm not that old, so hopefully that's not going to be the reality. But we'll continue to try, and that's a great summary. And maybe I'll ask you, Sasha, to add your thoughts on top of that.
Well, I was just going to add one thing, which is that one of the things that I've learned in working with all these folks over the past couple of or year and a half since I joined Northeastern, that I think has been especially useful, is that sure, we like to innovate, but we don't like to document. And that's been kind of the biggest learning that I've had, is making sure, and what I think the center is really trying to do, and that standing up this center to do this was really important. We're keeping track of everything, right? We're treating this not necessarily as, not only as all of this series of research projects, but we're documenting everything we're doing and all the processes in order to not just institutionalize the research that we're doing and the collection methods, but also operationalize all of this work so that we know how to replicate it and teach others how to do it, right? Like UCI and Northeastern may be at the forefront of this, but if higher ed is going to change, then other people are going to have to learn from our model. And so one thing that has been really, I think, useful in the work that we've been doing for me has been making sure that we have the beginnings of playbooks on how to institute all of this type of work, so that we're able to teach others what we've, not only what we've learned from a research perspective, but how to apply it in a streamlined sort of way, which is not, I'm not saying it's clean, but it is, it's something.
And if you don't document and communicate, or as my PhD advisor used to say, Jared, if you don't document and publish, it never happens. So, yeah, we don't want that to be the reality, because I think the future of higher education rests on these types of innovations moving forward. And I think also I think it's and you touched on it a little bit, Richard, and Mike, both when you were talking about some of the surveys and student feedback, but I'd like to sort of dive into that a little bit more in the context of how do you all think about I argue that we all put the student in the front and center of what we're trying to do, but how do you think about the impacts of the students linked to work in positive ways that they themselves might not even recognize? I mean, I think one of the things that's interesting about education in general in most places perhaps is, at 18 to 22, I would argue you shouldn't know what you want to do with the rest of your life. And then how we think about that in the context of experiential learning, right? Because over time that should allow shifts in through pathway work. I mean, one of the things that I've been trying to put, this is only over the last week, one of the things I've been trying to communicate to people around me and above me is like, you talk about all these metrics. Well, one metric, in my mind, one metric moving forward should be, do we have any repeat customers? Like, just don't, like, what did I do? I got my degree, had a great time. They reach out to me for money once a year. I maybe send them $100, and that's the only engagement I have with them. That's not the model I think that's going to be successful in the long run. So how the students integrated and how you all think about that is super interesting to hear from you on. However you want to take that.
I think one important aspect of that, or related to that, is students recognizing what they're learning and being able to talk about it. If you ask someone what they're doing in school as a high school student, they probably go directly to the academic subjects, right? A lot of times. And making them aware of all the other learning that's going on, especially in co-ops or internships or other situations, is really important for the student to be able to realize and realize the achievement and the growth that they're making, but also talk to others about it and to put that forth, right? To whether it is on a resume or in a job application or applying to college, being able to articulate and understand all these other things that they are learning beyond what we might just signal to others, I think is really an important aspect of the work.
That's a great point. I would also argue that we need, as a community, need to do a better job of supporting teachers in the primary schools to be able to do that. Because I also, what do you want your students to be? I teach biology. I want them to be biologists. I'm like, yeah, that's not a thing. Like, they're not going to be biologists. And what other skills are you giving them by giving them these assignments, right? So I think that's, and it's interesting, biased clearly about many things, but in Massachusetts in particular, the Chapter 74, the CTE schools, the vocational schools, tend to do a better job than a lot of the other schools in the state. So it's really interesting to look at how those have evolved over time. Like, I would have never gone to a vocational school. My parents would have been mortified. Like, you're going to school, Jared, with all the people who can't go to college, right? But that's fundamentally not what they are these days. So there's all kinds of intricacies there to look at.
Yeah, and asking students to talk about them, right? And you do see a movement, right? Indiana has really interesting new graduation pathways. I think for graduates in maybe 2029, that there's going to be different preparation towards university, towards work, towards public service. And so in those realms, they'll have to articulate these other things that they're learning. And hopefully, as you say, society values those things and listens.
Yeah, Mike, one of the things I really appreciate about what we're learning off of the experiential learning research project is also knowing what matters when and getting much more nuanced about how we think about these pathways. So Richard, I don't know if you wanted to just say a little bit about, we kind of have a dosage effect, and we're sort of starting to understand what matters a little bit about 1 to 2 co-ops with that kind of thing. Because I think the more nuanced we can get about what matters in these pathways, the more we're going to see return students, and we're going to be able to talk about impact.
Yeah, let me speak to that, Connie, but by taking a step back to one of Jared's comments about the students. Do the students, know best about the paths they should be taking? because after all, they're 18 to 21 years old, and aren't we, don't we have a responsibility as educators to actually do some guidance here? And so that tension, I think we've seen some of that tension in our research, where at Northeastern, the vast majority of students get their co-ops through the college, through institutional mechanisms, the co-op directors, the faculty, and so on. But a handful will organize their co-ops on their own. They'll do it independently. And when we ask the students about these co-ops they got on their own in their surveys, they love them. They think they're great. But when we track the effects of those co-ops you got on your own to the labor market outcomes, we don't see anything like the positive results that we're seeing in the institutionalized college supported organized co-ops. And so here again, it's like a tension of students might be very happy, but they might not be challenged to develop not just the competencies that we think are important, but I was also going to add another concept. They might not be challenged to develop the dispositions, the career dispositions that are required for future success. And so that's kind of also what you're doing. You're developing competencies and skills, but also dispositions to persevere and be resilient and all the rest. So I was going to set it up with that, and then circling back to Connie's question about the specific research, we find indeed clear evidence that co-ops matter. Co-ops facilitate early labor market outcomes tremendously. It's responsible for why the Northeastern early employment outcomes look so exceptional. The co-ops play a key role in that. If you do more co-ops, you do better. We also find that this is particularly the case when the second co-op is in an area that builds on the first, that there's a trajectory that's you see some sort of specialization or concentration of the co-op area. When the second co-op is in a different area, you still get the advantages of doing co-ops, but it's similar to having done just one co-op. And so for these students that are not sure, they didn't like the first one, they're going to do a totally different area in the second, that might be a totally reasonable thing for them to do in terms of getting on path for future success. But you're not going to have the kind of amplifying effect of a second co-op in a particular area that makes you very attractive to employers. The firm you did that second co-op in might actually hire you because you've now done 2 in a row with them. And so we're investigating the dynamics like that. Like Connie says, very nuanced, very specific, that can really kind of inform both the co-op directors in designing the program, but also students in making informed choices about their own pathways.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a great point, right? And it's a great point too to articulate to students that kind of evidence-based approach, right? Because I wanted to be a scientist from freshman year in high school, and that's what I did. And I didn't do co-ops, but I could have, let's say I did 2 co-ops in my space back to back. Great, I would have had a dosing effect because I'm a scientist. But on the flip side, like maybe I'm an undecided student, and just being upfront about the fact, like, do 5 co-ops or 3 co-ops in different spaces, and it won't have that dosing effect, but it's still valuable in the career exploration.
Exactly, being honest and so that people can make informed decisions. Again, I believe strongly that the institution has an obligation to kind of provide information about the different pathways one can take, but ultimately we want to live in a society where individuals are making informed choices, and so and not everyone wants the highest paid job, and some people want to be fulfilled in other ways, including probably the folks on this call, right? We've ended up pursuing PhDs and doing this very particular work that that we were drawn to.
That's actually a great point. I try to articulate that to my own kids. I'm like, money's not everything.
That, working in education brings that to life. Following up on a really interesting, Richard, your point about the dosage and kind of the concentrated dosage, and that, are you able to tease out students when they enter whether or not they, in their own mind, have a clear pathway? Because that would be interesting to see. Because as Jared pointed out, some students not sure what. I certainly didn't know where I was going when I ended college, never mind when I began. So can you kind of tease that out, asking them early on how focused they are, how much they know where they're going?
I love that idea. We haven't done that analysis yet, but I love that suggestion. I think that's right. One of the things we ask students initially is, what do you want to get out of college? What do you want to get out of the co-ops? And tying that to these trajectories would be very powerful.
Yeah.
Clarifying.
Excellent. All right. So time moved too fast for me, but that's okay. I see that we're coming close to the top of the hour for us here on the recording, Zoom, Teams, podcast, whatever you want to say. So what I'd then like to do is go around the horn. I don't think that show's on ESPN anymore, but it was a good show. Before, pardon the interruption, they're not paying us, although I'm happy to find advertising if they would like to. Go around the horn and have you each just give your final thoughts, and then I'll close us out, and we can start in the opposite direction than we went the first time. So, Connie.
And I actually have watched Around the Horn, and pardon your interruption, I'm a ESPN junkie for a whole lot of reasons, not the least of which sports is a great place to build competencies.
Indeed it is. And we're trying to do that work in the college, so we should make sure that you're connected to that.
I would love to. I just want to, I think this is probably some of the most important work and setting the framework for the direction, as Richard alluded to, for the future of higher ed and work. And so I guess I just want to finish by really thanking Mike and Richard for being leaders in this and driving this forward, and you, Jared, for your support, because it's really exciting work that we're just beginning to get off the ground.
I'll just echo that. It's been so illuminating to me to learn from Mike and Richard and Connie about all of this work, and to be able to contribute to it in whatever way I can has been excellent. And I think we have a lot of exciting other additional projects that we're working on in the center that will build on and contribute to the learnings that we're having here. So I think the next 2 to 3 years in this center and in this space are going to be really exciting, given the landscape that we're living in right now. And I know that I'm looking forward to being part of it.
I'll continue the thanks, because it's fantastic working with Connie and Sasha. And to be honest, as a teaching professor, these opportunities don't always come up. Our days are pretty full, and so this opportunity is great. And my interest and background in assessment and psychometrics just fits really well with this opportunity, and so I'm grateful for it. And I'm looking forward to what we learn. I think it's timely and can really have an impact on how we assess students and assess things that we don't traditionally assess. And so I'm looking forward to learning from that.
And to continue on that note, I'm grateful for the opportunity of working with this team and doing this applied work at Northeastern. I would like to, as a final word, elevate what Northeastern's doing. We're with the introduction of AI and the profound transformations ahead in the future of college and work, and the likelihood that there's going to be even best case transitions, huge displacement, extraordinary challenges in college to career transitions, uh, challenges to early employment. These are going to be fundamental issues that will be very destabilizing to our country as a whole. And what Northeastern's doing with the co-op program, it's critically important to understand it and to be able to elevate that in the future, because again, we're going to be needing solutions to address and to apply to the challenges that I fear are coming in the decade ahead.
You and that's a perfect way to end, because I share those sentiments and hope that both Northeastern and UTI and others can help drive that path forward or pave that path forward. I think it's fundamentally, for me, it's super interesting to be able to think outside the box and try to figure out new ways to engage and do things differently. I mean, I always argue, and I don't know exactly the date, but the first institution of higher education was probably somewhere around 1100 AD, and not much has changed since then and now in the way that we operate. And there's opportunities to really think more differently and do a better job. So thank you, Richard and Mike and Sasha and Connie, for joining me today to talk about this. It's important work. I also fundamentally, as an educator, believe that disconnecting research from education and the work that we do is a misstep. So we try to make sure that we don't make that mistake in the college professional studies and provide more opportunities for those who are interested in doing research to do that. Although I'm recognizing it's a requirement, we're a different type of college. But I'm glad that we can engage and do those things, and look forward to seeing where the future takes us. And for all of our listeners, thanks for listening. Great conversation. Hope you learned something new, and reach out to us or me if you have any questions or thoughts. Love to find other ways to partner with as many people as possible. It takes a village, as they say. And of course, fundamentally, if you see me walking around campus, and of course I don't notice you because I don't, my best thinking is when I'm in motion, whether it's a car or walking. Used to be running, but not anymore. Jump in front of me and say hey, and just remember that I'm just Jared.